One of the great features of Blazor is that it can allow you to share your C# code between the backend server and the front-end client in the browser. Let's mash on that.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to revisit Blazor a little bit and look at sharing code between front ends and back ends and middle ends.
Middle
That's the
ends.
thing. Absolutely.
Is it an end if it's in the middle? I don't know if that works.
I feel like you are spreading false news right now. That it's absolutely possible.
Okay. So last time we talked about Blazor, we went through the sample or the file new project experience for just what's essentially just a client-side application. So all the code we were writing was just running on the client. There was no back-end server that had any logic to it. So today what we're going to look at is a scenario where we have an Asp.NET Core hosted backend, and then we have a Blazor front end, and they're able to talk to each other and share code. So let's take a look at, I'm just going to do file new project again, and this is one of the templates that's built in. So for Blazor, once you have that tooling in there, you get there by just creating a new Asp.NET Core application, and then it's one of the templates that's available. So last time we looked at this guy, the standalone Blazor application. This time we're looking at Blazor with Asp.NET Core hosted. Okay, so that creates a project for us with a solution for us with three different projects. There's the client, which is the Blazor part, and that'll look similar to what we had before. It has the program start and the startup and the Razor, or in this case Blazor pages that make up our application. And then there's a server side that just looks like a standard API kind of Asp.NET Core thing. We have also a startup and a program. That's just initializing the controller bits. And then here we have, this example is really simple. It's just a controller that returns weather forecasts in the only correct temperature measurement, which is Celsius. So it's just giving us random data here, but it's returning a list of weather forecast objects. If we look at where that weather forecast class is defined, that's actually over in this third project called web application 8.shared. And here there's the date and the temperature in Celsius and a summary of that temperature, and then here we have some logic in here. So it's converting this Celsius temperature into some made-up unit of measure called F for temperatures, which has some bizarre math applied to it.
Yeah, that's super weird. I can't imagine any sort of logical temperature system being built on that.
Very strange.
Like that would make freezing point 32 degrees. That's weird.
Makes for a good demo of a bit of logic anyway on our model class.
Yeah. Nobody in the real world would use temperature system like this.
So if we look at how these things are wired up here, we'll see that the server project has a reference to that shared library and also a reference to the client, because the server is going to be serving up the initial requests from the client, or to serve up the index HTML from that client. The interesting thing to me here is that the client project also has a reference to that shared library. So if we look at the implementation, well, let's run this first and we'll just kind of see what happens. So it's going to spin up a server, I assume an IS Express for us, just like it normally would when you run a Asp.NET Core app. I actually don't know if it used IS Express for that. Let me check. It did. Here's my app. I have a counter, which is just some client-side stuff. And then here's that fetch data where it goes to the server and it returns that data. And you can see that it's doing that conversion to Fahrenheit here. The interesting thing about that is that it's actually doing that exact same logic with the exact same code, but running on the client side, right? So if we look at what's happening here with that on the page that's being rendered, so we have our fetch data page. when the page loads, which triggers this onInit async method to be called, it's just calling the HTTP client and get JSON async, making a call to that API endpoint and getting the data back, which is again just an array of weather forecast objects, and assigns that to the forecast variable here, which is an array. And then in our Blazor page, we're just iterating over that and rendering out a table with the data there. So we're able to do two short date strings. We're using .NET date format details there, or a date format method there. We're logging out the Celsius and Fahrenheit and then a summary. And we're able to share, again, this is a really simple example, obviously, but we're sharing that, not just the model class, but we're sharing the logic too. And this is something that I've seen, it's kind of a point of friction on a lot of projects between the back end and the front end, that it's easy enough to get the data, but to also get the data in a shape that you expect, I suppose. But to get the data along with some implementation information, like the methods on a class, or in this case, a getter with some logic implemented on it, that's always a little bit tricky, and it's not always obvious when you're deserializing JSON and loading it up into something in memory in JavaScript, that sometimes even if your backend is also implemented in JavaScript, sometimes you think you're sharing implementations there between the two, but when you deserialize, you're not actually getting you're just getting the data in the same shape.
You're just getting something exactly that's the same shape. I have seen a ton of bugs related to that.
And it's one that's even kind of hard to explain to people sometimes why it's happening. But
yeah, it's because like JavaScript, or at least TypeScript objects, are not really first-class objects like you would expect in C#. Like if you deserialize something in C# into a class, it becomes that class. If you deserialize something in JavaScript, then it just becomes a thing that has those fields on it. And if you have additional functionality around it, that doesn't exist on it. You need to actually go out and pass that into an object and have a constructor on it that will add those fields.
So if we look at the call here, the thing that from this sample is a little bit funny is that because that temperature Fahrenheit is implemented as a getter, it's still getting serialized and passed across. So I'm just going to make a quick change here that I totally didn't test ahead of time to test a theory, but I'm going to remove that the getter, and switch it over to a method. So instead of, I wonder if this will work. So what we're going to do is so now I wouldn't expect the temperature F to get serialized and actually crossed over the wire with that request. Of course, now I made that change. This immediately in my Blazor client-side page gives me an error here, but I can just call that method. And this should still work as it did before, but my payload should be a little smaller because now that property won't be serialized as part of that request to get the temperature data. In theory.
I'm excited to see what the result of this is.
Me too, Simon. Hey, it worked.
Looks like it still works, so that's progress.
I'll just refresh the page here to get that again. And now when we look at this data, we have a date, we have a temperature C and a summary, but we do not have the temperature F. So.
Well, that's definitely something to think about. That's a little bit of an implementation detail that you wouldn't think to check, like if you're optimizing your payloads.
Yeah, well, another
using
thing
those auto properties.
Another thing you could do, we could have done, is just done a JSON ignore on that. Like put the JSON ignore attribute on that, and then it would have, the JSON serializer would not have serialized that property, but just something to be aware of. I just wanted to show that this works for methods too, that we're actually sharing that implementation, that it wasn't just using the value that was serialized across.
Well, that's awesome.
So that's all I had for today. Next time we look at Blazor, I want to look at kind of a more in-depth example that shows a little bit more of, I guess, a real-world example of a client and server application where we have an Asp.NET Core backend, but where we're managing more state on the client side. So talking a little bit about an approach that you might use for that, or what that might look like in a real-world scenario. Well, that's it for today.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming and watching. Remember to, I'm so used to saying like, comment, and share from back in the channel 9 days. I have to say subscribe. Please subscribe to our videos, I guess. I mean, I gotta be honest with you people. Like, if you subscribe or you don't subscribe, it doesn't give me any money. So I don't really care. We're never gonna earn money from these videos. So subscribe, because then we feel better about ourselves for having lots of subscribers.
Yep.
There we go.
All right.
Make a monster happy by subscribing.
Thanks a lot,
All right,
Simon.
we'll see everybody next time.
Bye.